So in this segment, we're going to be talking about seize the Brexit opportunity to revamp red tape, according to Telegraph. And the Telegraph keep going backwards and forwards on, we should burn red tape and we should be more agile and cut red tape here and there, and really look at reformation in some places. And they're just all over the shop. I guess that's what happens when you have so many writers who have no brain cells between them. But they say, as the global economy recovers from the pandemic, absorbs the impact of the Russia's invasion of Ukraine and wrestles with inflation. I don't think that first two lines even make sense. The UK faces the additional challenge of the Brexit transition, which is true. We are facing that as well. Changes. Some of the stuff they say in this article doesn't make sense, and we'll talk about that when we get to it. But it's Brexit Britain. We have not inherited powers from the EU, but we have the ability to go below the EU's base regulations if we are happy with starting a trade war with them or getting rid of the TCA. It just depends on what we want. The UK's regulatory regime isn't as eye-catching a topic as debates over tax, spending and interest rates, because those things, they don't impact people more, but I think people see it as them impacting them more, tax, spending, interest rates. But getting it right is central to Britain's long-term economic growth in the post-Brexit world, yet our economy is struggling along really badly. Post-Brexit Britain, not looking too good. Brexit has seen regulatory authority return to the UK. Again, we already had regulatory authority. The EU just set the minimum standards. I don't understand why the Telegraph can't understand this. We had our own internal regulators. We went above and beyond typical base EU rules for financial institutions. We had our own medicines regulator, for example. It's just, the idea that we have re-gotten our regulatory authority is ridiculous. So far, however, we have largely maintained the system inherited from the EU. It's almost like we helped create those EU rules. Scary, scary I know, but it's the truth. It's time to act, not by setting fire to regulations. Why? I thought you wanted a bonfire of regulations. End all the red tape. Smart, agile regulation must be part of post-Brexit Britain's competitive advantage. Again, it's just buzzwords, isn't it? You got about, 2 different buzzwords there? While maintaining the economic, social and environmental standards our citizens demand, and which are central to a modern free trade agreement. So you want smart, agile regulations, but you also want to maintain our economic, social and environmental standards that the people demand in this country. Well, that's not happening given how much sewage is being dumped into the waters. We would be, I think, in violation of the EU's water protocols. That said, existing regulatory regimes are often ratchet risk aversion, and red tape onto both regulators and regulated. Regulators inherently should be risk averse because risks are dangerous, and when they don't pay off, it's the regulator that gets it in the ear, and you have a massive amount of failures, which are absolute disasters. And to avoid blame for things to avoid blame for things going wrong. That's what every regulator does their best to do. Regulators are incentivized to add precautionary procedures to legislation and regulations. Obviously, that's true. That's their job. Their job isn't to help institutions. Their job is to help regulate them, to make sure they're not doing anything too risky, to make sure that, whatever institution there's, say, for water, the regulatory regime for water is meant to make sure the water is safe, it's not polluted, it's drinkable, you can have a bath or a shower in it, not die if you take a bath, for example, or if you drink the water, you get some sort of poisoning. Too often, regulation snarls the compliant in red tape without tackling real abuse. That's not really true. If you want regulators to tackle real abuse, you have to give them more power and more money. That's all it is. You have to give them the ability to tackle the big polluters. Because I remember reading one of these, the water regulator took like 7 years or something to investigate one of the water companies accused of illegal dumping. 7 years. 7 years. That money's gone. All the profits they made from doing the illegal dumping in the waters, that money's all gone to shareholders already. So yeah, I agree. I agree that regulators do need to do more to tackle real abuse. But the only way they're going to do that is if they get more powers and more finance. That's it. Public sector professionals like nurses, teachers, and police officers often complain they are diverted from the front line by bureaucracy. Did you interview any teachers, any nurses, any police? Because sure, some of them might complain about some of the red tape that they have, but I don't think they'll complain that much compared to the chronic underfunding that all three of those groups have taken. I think they would be far more complaining of the lack of service, the lack of help that they've gotten. Businesses say the same, and yet you've added more red tape for businesses trying to export or import from the EU. Yeah, very smart you are. Nor is it a level playing field across regulators, or some regulators have to have more power than others. That makes sense because they have different responsibilities. Some have magisterial authority and can intervene flexibly across their sectors as new issues arise. Others find themselves colliding with each other and struggling to respond to changing circumstances. Again, they're going to collide with each other because some argue over jurisdiction. You see that with American police force all the time. It's like, goddamn FBI taking my cases. It's just, if you set up a better structure for them to work together rather than having to butt heads all the time, it makes more sense. Elsewhere, rapid technological change is bringing with it the challenge of how to regulate new sectors. I suppose, but that's why you have, governments and think tanks and other organizations to look at, the changing of technology and how we can regulate it. They talk about artificial technology and machine learning, offering new opportunities to modernize regulatory supervision and compliance to reduce burdens on those they regulate. Again, AI is fine, machine learning, they're fine, but you're decades away from them, dealing with anything to do with regulations. As in, you can't rely on machine learning and AI to deal with any kind of regulations, especially when a lot of these things are only as good as the people that coded them originally. So if they have any biases when they're coded, you're going to have problems later on down the line. Relying on AI and machine learning for regulatory compliance is just a bad idea. We already know how, as our response to the pandemic, has offered an oversight into less bureaucratic model for many in the public sector. Let's go back to the pandemic, right? You had massive billions of pounds of money wasted on PPE and other things, right? Billions. Test and Trace they wasted 32 billion on that, right? Because they managed to cut corners. They hired Dido Harding. I think it was found illegal by the courts. Not great. So you had that problem. First of all, you wasted loads of money. Second problem. Third problem is that they cut corners for the vaccine, right? The AstraZeneca vaccine was only used on people, I think, above the age of 30, because there were certain side effects potentially people could face. So they came up with the conclusion that people under the age of 30 could have the Moderna one and the Pfizer one. So cutting corners on regulations is not always a good idea. Yes, having the vaccine was important, but there were side effects. There was a reason why certain governments were reluctant to use the AstraZeneca vaccines. It wasn't because, Brexit, Britain made it. How could they? It's because it wasn't the safest one or the best one. And that's what happens when you cut corners too much. For the past few months, I convened a panel of professionals who have worked with the think tank Policy Exchange to develop reforms needed to address these challenges, yet you didn't have the time to talk to nurses or teachers or police officers about what kind of red tape impacts them, but you've got power to convene a panel of professionals. Goddamn, man, your priorities. Britain needs fewer authoritative regulators. So Britain needs regulators that will deal with the real crimes, but also needs fewer authoritative regulators. Okay then. With clear mandates from government and accountable to Parliament. They're already accountable to Parliament, though. That's why select committees exist. Judged on impact, not process. That's fine, but a procedure has to be in place there. You can't just let them, regulators act willy-nilly on whatever they want to do. And just because they get the impact right, just because they do the right thing, if they don't follow the right processes, you can face problems when things go wrong. Regulators' performance should also be judged to regular independent review by the National Audit Office. Cool, are you going to give the National Audit Office the money to be doing that? Because that's a lot more work you're asking for if it's an annual thing. Regulators should be required to collaborate with each other and international counterparts to triage their interventions. After Brexit, it's a lot more harder to do that. Especially when we don't have access to EU databases and things like that. But I agree, they should collaborate with each other. That's what they should be told to do. Try and work together to solve problems rather than butting heads about jurisdiction. This is to minimise the burden on compliant individuals and institutions. That's fine. Regulators should be dynamic and responsive. This means establishing feedback loops and internal challenge functions. Again, that's fine, but if you create a system where people can constantly pick holes in regulators and they should do it for no reason other than to gum up the system and charge the taxpayer more money, such a system can't exist. It doesn't work. Drawing on data analysis and behavioural science. Sure, those are fine things, but what about data analysis? What about behavioural science do you want to use to create these feedback loops? That's the question. Buzzwords are buzzwords at the end of the day. Regulators must be confident that ministers have their backs. They don't. You've got the government constantly attacking the Bank of England and the Prudential Regulatory Authority over the lack of deregulation. So, the government don't have the regulators' backs. Because at the end of the day, someone has to hold the buck here, and the government will pass the buck on every time to regulators we don't really know much about. The UK has the opportunity to both streamline regulation and modernise it to deliver the high environmental and social standards our citizens desire. That's not true though, is it? Because we keep cutting corners. We've allowed water companies to dump raw sewage. I'll be talking about that in a few days. Dump raw sewage in the waters. and there was no punishment for it. They're still doing it now. Beaches are being closed, etc. MPs are crying about it, but they're the ones who can do something, and they choose not to. You can't create a system that's deregulated and streamlined and competitive and all this nonsense. Competing with who? Who are you competing with when it comes to water safety? Because it's not the developed world. I'll tell you that for free. Might be competing with the developing world given the state of our waterways. The desire to be competitive edge the post-Brexit economy demands is now for the government and parliament to seize it. I mean, it's just a load of buzzwords and nonsense. You want them to be more agile, yet you want them to deal with where's it gone? You want them to deal with more, be tougher on actual crimes and things like that. It's just ridiculous. I know people get annoyed about me scrolling all the time, so apologies for that. But you want two different things here. You're asking, this is the same thing we covered in an article previously, right? They want the regulator to be both strong and tough on real crimes, but also really agile and streamlined, which doesn't work. You can't have regulators that are like really agile, streamlined, can cut corners, etc., and then say, "Oh, look at the pandemic! Look how great that was." It was terrible. It was really bad and required a lot of government intervention. The more government intervention we had, the better it was. Apart from when the government tried to cut corners on procurement laws, and look at what disaster that was. So bad. We're going to pay Dyson for, I think, ventilators we couldn't even use because they want to create weird ones instead of using the already designed and standardized sets that we have already. It's just so stupid. But anyways, look, these people are just genuinely just crazy. And they have no idea what they're talking about. They want two different things here. And a person who tries to reach two objectives at the same time won't... two different destinations at the same time won't reach one. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can. And hopefully I'll see you in the next one.